Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of William Michael Dennis? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. William Michael Dennis was born sometime around 1950 and lived in San Jose, California. He went by the name Michael. When he was young, he experienced hearing loss and used hearing aids. As a result, he was bullied in school, and teachers assumed that he was intellectually disabled. His parents divorced when he was 9 years old. Michael gained a lot of weight and became depressed because he could not find a girlfriend. Despite these challenges, Michael was considered by others to be friendly, easygoing, thoughtful, sensitive, honest, and compassionate. He worked for Lockheed Martin as a machine operator and was considered to be a good employee. In 1975, Michael met a physical therapist named Doreen, and they married a few months later. They had a son named Paul on April 17, 1976. The marriage between Michael and Doreen was not stable. The couple divorced in 1979, and Doreen was awarded primary custody of Paul. Michael did not dispute this outcome. He believed that Doreen would be a good caregiver for Paul. The same year that Doreen divorced, she married a man named Charles Herbert and had a daughter named Deanna. Doreen, Charles, Deanna, and Paul lived in the same house in San Jose. Michael lived in a house about 6 blocks away. His mother lived in a separate apartment in the back of the house. He would see Paul on some weekends. Michael would pick Paul up from Doreen's house. Paul was Michael's only connection to Doreen after the divorce. On February 10, 1980, Michael dropped Paul off at Doreen's house. Doreen was not paying attention to Paul, and he managed to climb through a fence and into a swimming pool in the backyard. By the time Doreen realized that he was missing, Paul was in bad shape. He was taken to a hospital, but died 3 days later, on February 13, 1980. Michael was furious that his son died and blamed Doreen and Charles. He filed a wrongful death lawsuit against them in 1981. In March of 1982, a jury found in favor of the Herberts. Michael was devastated by this defeat. He did not understand how it was possible. After the trial, Charles told Michael not to come by the house anymore. Over 2 years later, in October 1984, Lockheed Martin delivered some bad news to Michael. The job he had as a sprayer was eliminated. They offered him another job in the document reproduction unit. Michael had been making $13.53 an hour, but now he was only going to make $10.99 an hour. He was not happy about being demoted and did not like his new job. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On October 31, 1984, Halloween night, Charles took his daughter, Deanna, trick-or-treating after he arrived home from work. Doreen was 8 months pregnant at this time. She stayed in the house. Charles deliberately did not visit a few houses right by his house so that Doreen could at least take Deanna trick-or-treating for a short time. After Doreen and Deanna returned, Charles told Doreen that she should not answer the door anymore. At about 9 p.m., he drove to a nearby liquor store. The trip took him about 15 minutes. When he arrived back at his house, he witnessed a horrific sight. 31-year-old Doreen was on the floor bleeding. Her fetus was also on the floor. The child did not survive. Charles assumed that Doreen had miscarried. He noticed that Doreen's hand was separated from her arm, and she had severe cuts on her neck and stomach. When he was making his way to the telephone to call for help, Charles slipped and fell in the blood. He was unable to connect to 911, therefore he called the fire department and a neighbor. Deanna had been in the house and was hiding when the murders occurred. She came out of hiding when Charles entered the house. The neighbor that Charles contacted took Deanna to her house. When the paramedics arrived, Doreen was still alive, but she died on the way to the hospital. The police arrested Charles because he had alcohol on his breath and he was covered in blood. they thought there was a good chance that he was the killer. When he was in the back of the police vehicle, Charles tried to kick out a window and tried to put his head through a window. This did not help his case as far as not being considered a potential suspect in the murders. Here's what the police found during their investigation. There was a lot of blood at the crime scene, including on the floor, the front door, and the ceiling. It appeared as though the killer used some type of edged weapon to strike Doreen. The ceiling was cut from when the killer lifted the weapon into the air. A wolf mask was found in the corner of the front porch. The mask did not come from the Herbert family house. The police spoke to Deanna. Here's what she told them. Her mother, Doreen, answered the door, and a man was standing there. Doreen said, quote, "Get out of my house," unquote. The man responded, quote, "I'm going to kill you," unquote. Doreen ordered Deanna to hide behind the couch, and Deanna complied. She did not see what happened. When she came out from behind the couch, there was blood everywhere. She went back behind the couch until her father, Charles, returned. At 12:23 a.m., now on November 1, the police paid a visit to Michael Dennis. He did not answer the door when the police knocked. They had dispatch call him and ask him to open the door. The police could hear water running in the house for a few minutes before Michael finally opened the door. When investigators informed him that his ex-wife had been murdered, Michael replied, "You're kidding." Michael had bandages wrapped around the fingers of his right hand. There was blood coming through the bandages. His fingers had been severely cut. Michael allowed the police to search his house. They found blood in a few different areas, including in front of the washer and dryer, in the kitchen, on a pair of jeans which were found on Michael's bed, on bandages in a trash can in the bathroom, on a set of keys in Michael's bedroom, and in Michael's pickup truck. This didn't look too good for Michael, but his situation became much worse when the police discovered a blood trail which led all the way from Doreen's house to Michael's house. Michael told the police that he arrived home at about 4 p.m. after working. He said that he cut his fingers when he threw a kitchen knife into the air and then grabbed it by the blade. It was an accident. Michael denied involvement in the murder and said he was not at Doreen's house that night. The police placed Michael under arrest, but he was released 2 days later as the state continued to build a case against him. Charles Herbert was released from custody after the police cleared him of any involvement. He had a receipt from the liquor store, and the clerk remembered him being there. Charles was in the liquor store when the murder occurred. He is one of the few people who can say that a desire for alcohol actually helped him in any way. The police focused all their effort on Michael. More evidence was found implicating him in the murders. Michael's house was searched again. This time investigators found a receipt for a Stanley 18-inch machete, as well as an adhesive label belonging to the machete. The police did not find the actual machete. The injuries to Doreen were consistent with a machete attack. The wolf mask that was found at Doreen's house matched one that Michael had on at a Halloween party a year earlier. At the crime scene, blood was found that matched Michael's blood type. At Michael's house, blood was found that matched Doreen's blood type. DNA testing was not available at this time. Michael was rearrested on November 5, 1984, and charged with murder. He went to trial in July 1988. In the middle of the trial, Michael changed his plea from not guilty to not guilty by reason of insanity. On August 16, 1988, Michael was found guilty of first-degree murder and second-degree murder. He was eventually sentenced to death, but that sentence was later modified to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. Paul's death had a tremendous negative impact on Michael. The circumstances of his death were difficult for Michael to process. He had been worried about Paul drowning long before it happened. Prior to Paul's death, Doreen's puppy had fallen into the same swimming pool in the backyard and drowned. Michael was so worried about Paul's safety, he offered to pay for Doreen to put a fence around the pool. Doreen rejected this idea, although eventually she did have a fence constructed. Unfortunately, the fence was inferior. On the day that Paul fell into the pool, Doreen was supposed to be watching him. When she finally realized that he was missing, Doreen did not check the swimming pool. She would later say that she was afraid of what she would see. Therefore, Doreen went to a neighbor's house and asked them to check in the swimming pool. When they did, they of course found Paul. Even at this point, Doreen did not jump into the pool. Michael was furious with Doreen. He eventually came to believe that she deliberately killed Paul because she was jealous of the relationship that Paul had with him. Many people who knew Michael described him as a great father. In addition, after Paul would visit with Michael, he did not want to go home to his mother Doreen. This supported Michael's theory that Doreen killed due to jealousy. It's also possible that Doreen killed Paul to remove her last connection to Michael. Their divorce was acrimonious, and according to Michael, Doreen had multiple affairs. Maybe Doreen wanted to hurt Michael one last time and completely reject him by eliminating any connection between them. At Paul's funeral, Michael felt as though he was the only person who was sad. Doreen fought with Michael over funeral expenses, and she wanted the last child support payment. This only served to reinforce the idea that she was uncaring, cold, petty, and vindictive. Item number 2. When Michael was defeated in the wrongful death lawsuit, he wailed and said, quote, "She got away with it," unquote. He of course was referring to Doreen. Michael felt as though she needed to pay for Paul's death. He started plotting his revenge to compensate for the failure of the court system. Michael planned on drowning both Doreen and Charles so they would know what Paul felt like. He had anchors, nautical maps, stitched 2 body bags, and built 2 locking boxes that looked a lot like coffins. Michael's plan was to take them out to the ocean in his boat and throw them overboard. He gave up on this plan after realizing it would be difficult to implement, but he still fantasized about killing them. Item number 3. What types of mental health factors could have been at work in this case? Michael was evaluated by many different mental health clinicians of all different types. Not surprisingly, there were as many opinions as there were clinicians. Here are a few examples of the various diagnoses. Michael was diagnosed with major depressive disorder and dependent personality disorder. The clinician who made this diagnosis believed he was delusional. Another clinician who thought that Michael was delusional diagnosed him with delusional disorder persecutory type. This was caused by the belief that Doreen killed his son Paul. One clinician believed that Michael was extremely paranoid but not delusional. He was impulsive, self-critical, and had a tendency to overreact to anger. Another clinician who believed that Michael did not have any delusions said that he had adjustment disorder with mixed anxiety and depressed mood, as well as personality disorder with antisocial, borderline, narcissistic, and avoidant features. I find it curious that when looking at the different theories, Michael purportedly had traits from all 3 of the personality disorder clusters. Paranoid from cluster A, antisocial, borderline, and narcissistic from cluster B, and avoidant and dependent from cluster C. Like so many cases I've covered, this one illustrates the ineffective and unreliable nature of mental health assessment in criminal cases. Item number 4. What do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. At some point, Michael decided to kill Doreen because he believed that she murdered Paul. Michael may have been delusional, but his delusion was simply that his ex-wife killed his son deliberately. He didn't have a delusion about being a wolf. He didn't think that demons were telling him to commit the murders. He wasn't worried about being spied on by the FBI or the CIA. His delusion was not bizarre or fanciful. It was straightforward. Michael understood that even if Doreen was guilty, she did not deserve to die. So even if he fully believed in his delusion, he knew that he did not have the right to kill Doreen or her unborn child. When Michael committed the murders, he knew the difference between right and wrong. He made an extensive effort to escape responsibility for that reason. Michael selected Halloween in order to increase his chances of getting away, and he offered 23 different versions of his story to law enforcement and mental health clinicians after the murders. Whether Michael was delusional or not, he did not qualify for the insanity defense. I believe that Michael's motive was simply revenge. He wanted Doreen to pay for letting Paul die. Michael claimed that he did not know that Doreen was pregnant and would not have killed her if he had known. I believe that Michael was lying. He may have actually targeted Doreen when he did because she was pregnant. Michael wanted to get revenge for Paul. He wanted Doreen to experience the same loss that he experienced. In Michael's mind, Doreen wasn't the only person to blame. He also blamed himself for trusting her. Michael was racked with guilt and shame. He could not forgive Doreen, and he could not forgive himself. On Halloween night, Michael unleashed the monster of vengeance, despair, rage, resentment, vindictiveness, and self-hatred. By putting on a mask, he revealed his true nature. Those are my thoughts on the case of William Michael Dennis. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comments section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching, and happy Halloween.